All right, so even though we've been having some good news on the COVID front, with Joe Biden just recently announcing that the United States moved up the timeline for when we were going to have the supply of vaccines necessary to vaccinate every single U.S. adult. He moved it up to May. It was previously going to be around July. So we've been having a little bit of good news. It's still that light at the end of the tunnel of when coronavirus is going to be like over in the United States. It's still, somewhat in the distant future, maybe towards the end of the year or into the beginning of 2022. Being optimistic, we hope that it's going to be around the end of 2021. But even as we've been having some of this good news come out recently, we still have some conservative freaks like Greg Abbott pulling stunts like this while his state is not nearly close to herd immunity and while they are still suffering disastrous consequences from coronavirus. So he says this: I just announced Texas is open 100%. Everything. I also just ended the statewide mask mandate. So you know who loves this? Besides the unfortunate 305,000 people who like this tweet, you know who else likes this is coronavirus, because we are at the precipice. Like I was just saying, we can kind of see that light at the end of the tunnel here in coronavirus in the United States. The problem since the beginning has been conservative policies that favor economic freedom, or what they say is economic freedom, over public health. And this is the problem here. You cannot solve the economic downturn without first solving the public health crisis. That is the one thing that conservatives, including Trump and how he handled the coronavirus, including all of these state leaders, including all of these senators, etc., how they have been operating is under that principle, or not understanding that principle. You cannot solve the economic crisis without first solving the public health crisis. Why? Because if you have a raging pandemic in your state, believe it or not, consumer habits are going to be affected by that. And people might not want to go and sit in a packed movie theater or go to a packed gym. Some people might, but other people might not want to do that if there is a raging pandemic where thousands of people are dying, okay? That's pretty simple. I would think or hope that most people can understand that concept, that you cannot detach the two. You cannot simply pretend as if the virus is gone and everything is back to normal. That's not going to work, because your healthcare system is probably going to collapse, and your hospitals are going to be flooded, and you're going to see excess deaths that are totally unnecessary and a consequence of conservative policies like this. So this is obviously being hounded as premature by others. So the Republican governor of Texas issued an executive order Tuesday lifting the populous state's mask mandate and other remaining coronavirus-related restrictions, a move public health experts and Democratic critics characterized as dangerously premature given the state's low vaccination rate. Quote, "It is still too early," Dr. Philip Huang, the health director of Dallas County, said shortly before Governor Greg Abbott triumphantly declared on Twitter that Texas is 100% open. So, yeah, on the vaccination issue, Texas is in the bottom 5% per capita vaccination rates in the country. The bottom 5. Not bottom 5%. The bottom 5 in vaccination rates per capita in the country. So that's around like 7% of Texans have been vaccinated. So in other words, nowhere even remotely close to herd immunity or anything even approaching herd immunity. So what is the point of this? Why is he doing this? Well, he's doing this for political reasons, 100% political reasons. This is what he thinks his Trump base wants him to do. This is the kind of things that they have been pushing for the entire time, to reopen prematurely. And this is just obviously going to have disastrous consequences. But, it's what you expect from somebody like Greg Abbott, who has absolutely no understanding or care for actual data or science, given what we just saw in his handling of the winter crisis in Texas. So what happened in Texas with the winter storm that came through, what was the cause of all of these problems? Well, most of it was because Texans, conservative Republican Texans, and their policies ensured that the Texas energy grid was not regulated by the federal government and had little regulations relative to the rest of the country. And of course, this man who has no understanding of science or data at all blamed it all on renewable energy, blamed it all on wind turbines, and blamed it all on AOC and the Green New Deal, even though it was actually mostly fossil fuel energy production that was affected by this storm, and the conservative policies that led to them not being prepared and outfitting their energy systems with the necessary materials to protect from this type of situation. So again, a perfect analogy that we just saw last week for how this man, Greg Abbott, has a total disregard for any semblance of scientific understanding. So continuing on, the governor's office said in a press release that Abbott's new executive order rolls back most of his earlier unilateral actions related to the coronavirus pandemic, saying effective next Wednesday, all businesses of any type may open to 100% capacity, the statement reads. Additionally, this order ends the statewide mask mandate in Texas. Businesses may still limit or implement additional safety protocols at their own discretion. This is pretty much nonsense what you're saying here. If you're going to have a response to a public health crisis, it needs to be a coordinated response. You can't have haphazardly, okay, this gym over here is 100% capacity and nobody has to wear masks, and you know this store over here has masks and is limited capacity. You can't have that. Why? Because then the pandemic is still going to spread. It's still going to spread rampantly. If you give them the ability, and you don't give them, if you give them the ability to fully reopen, conservatives never wanted to do any sort of a real lockdown and pay businesses to stay closed or pay workers to stay home for any sustained period of time, which is what I think it would have actually taken. And I understand if you're not going to give people relief in order to close their businesses, or you're not going to give people relief in order to stay home and not work, such that we can get rid of the pandemic, you would have to actually provide that relief. And so I understand if nobody's offering that relief, why people are so urgently trying to reopen business. But the reason why we can't get relief to people in order to completely shut down is because of the conservative mindset in our response to this pandemic that our entire country has been having. So there's no universal response here. You're just haphazardly saying you do what you want to do, you do what you want to do. And this is what we've been doing from a national scale as well. States, you do what you want to do. Okay, well, believe it or not, if we all live in the same country and people are traveling across borders within states, then yeah, the pandemic is going to continue spreading around the entire country regardless of how some states happen to operate. So you have to have a uniform response to a public health crisis is the point that I'm trying to get at here. But this is obviously the opposite of what conservatives have been pushing. They've been pushing for individual freedom in a circumstance that requires, even though you still have access to all of your other individual freedoms, yeah, you have to take basic precautions in order to protect yourself and protect the people around you. They have refused to do this, obviously. So pointing out that Texas has vaccinated less than 7% of its population, the Texas Democratic Party chair, Gilberto Hinojosa, called Abbott's order extraordinarily dangerous and warned that this will kill Texans. Quote, our country's infectious disease specialists have warned that we should not put our guard down even as we make progress towards vaccination. Abbott doesn't care. He continued, make no mistake, opening Texas prematurely will only lead to the faster spread of COVID, more sickness and overcrowding in our hospitals, and unnecessary deaths. There is no economic recovery without beating the coronavirus pandemic. This will set us back, not move us forward. Absolutely correct there. Again, you cannot decouple the pandemic and the economic crisis. They are inextricably intertwined together. You have to solve the public health crisis first. And this is another good anecdote here from a small business owner talking about what position it puts them in to just have every single individual business do whatever they want. We've all seen these videos of people throwing temper tantrums inside of some stores that require mask mandate. And we've seen how business operators have been having to deal with these things. And this is just a good anecdote to explain that. So as a small business owner, it's putting us in the firing line where you have to make the best decision for you and your business. And you're going to be fighting people who are literally celebrating in the streets. Danette Wicker, the owner of a boutique shop in Fort Worth, told the Texas Tribune. Here in Fort Worth, people are having temper tantrums, knocking stuff off counters. People have had to be physically removed from businesses around here. So yeah, you're putting these businesses in a worse position right now because now they're going to be having to deal with even more rabid hog conservatives that are going to be trying to bust down the doors of these places that are requiring masks and saying, oh, well, I have a medical exemption, or, oh, well, the statewide mask mandate is over, therefore I can come into your store and do whatever the fuck I want, and thereby jeopardizing their own workers' safety in these stores. So you're putting these small business owners or business owners in general in the position where they have to say, well, I want to keep my workers safe and healthy, but at the same time, these other businesses are fully reopening and not requiring people to wear masks. So your business is going to be ostracized. Your business is potentially going to be literally physically attacked in some cases. And it just puts everybody in that situation at more risk and in more danger, not just from COVID, but again, from literal physical attacks. Because that's where we're at in this country, where people think that wearing a mask is somehow an infringing on their liberties and their freedoms, instead of just participating in a uniform effort to solve the public health crisis so that we can then solve the economic crisis, because again, you can't do one without the other. So this is a horrific order that Greg Abbott is doing here. It will 100% lead to excess deaths that were totally unnecessary. And this is just a reminder of the result and a result of what these conservative policies will bring about in this country and have brought about in this country.